Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us to part 2 of our webinar series, SAP Cloud Security Madness. Today's topic is going to be the cloud identity provisioning or cloud identity provisioning. Our presenter today is Steffen Schato from our German team. And I see there are still a bunch of people joining right now, so we'll give them maybe another minute or two to get settled, and then we'll start at 2 or 3 past the hour. So hang tight, please, for another minute or two, and we'll get started shortly. Alrighty, it's 2 past the hour, so I think we're gonna get started. There are still people joining, but that's all right. They're hopefully not gonna miss a lot. And again, as last time, we'll have a recording of this session as well as all the other sessions that we'll do. There are 5 more after this one. Also, you should have received an email with a link to the recording of the previous part, the first webinar, as well as a copy of the slide deck. If you did not, then either let me know in the chat, please, or just send me an email to mkummer@exciting.us, and I'll see what happened. But today, again, our core topic is going to be cloud identity provisioning. Steffen Schato is going to lead us through this webinar today, number 2 out of a 7-part series. If you have any questions either during the webinar or at the end, please feel free to use the questions box here in the GoToWebinar control panel. So you should see that depending on the version of GoToWebinar you have, probably on the right hand side. It might be collapsed, so if you click on that little arrow next to questions, you should see a text box where you can type in. So just type us your questions, and we'll try to keep an eye on those questions during the webinar, and we'll answer anything that we can. Anything that we can't, meaning the ones that aren't speaking, hopefully Steffen can address them at the end. We should have a good 10-15 minutes at the end to go through any questions that you guys might have. There are some questions that we will answer as part of the next couple of webinars, so we likely won't pick them up today and ask you to just come back for whenever we talk about that particular topic, so we don't have to repeat everything. And the same happened last time. We didn't answer everything because some of those questions we'll have answers to as part of today's and the next couple of webinars. And with that being said, I'm going to go on mute and hand it over to Steffen, and he'll do a quick intro, show you the agenda, and tell you basically what he'll be talking about today. All right, Steffen, all yours.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our webinar series, Cloud Security Madness. My name is Steffen Schato, and I'm presenting from Switzerland right now. And I'm happy to have you here for today's webinar about SAP Cloud Identity Provisioning, or IPS. So what are we going to see today? Let's take first a look at the agenda. This is quite familiar You might be quite familiar with that from the first webinar. First, we're going to have a short introduction. I'm going to show you where we stand in the webinar series. We're going to have a short recap of webinar number 1, so that you might recall some things from the first webinar. It's just 2 slides, so this will be very short. And right after that, we're going to jump into the overview of SAP Cloud Identity Services, identity provisioning. Yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and yeah, what kind of possibilities we have with it, why is it there, and how is it compared to the other identity things that SAP has in its portfolio, like identity authentication or identity management. So yeah, I'm trying to get some clarity into that cloud madness. After that, I'm going to show you a live demonstration of a specific use case. Also, I will put some arrows in there because you won't see very much what's happening really behind the scenes. So I'm just trying to show you how to use the transformation and how to fix some errors, so that you can see how you can work with the IPS. And after that, we're going to have an outlook to the coming webinars, and also you can ask me any question and I'm trying to respond to it. So let's start with a short introduction. You already know Alessandro and Carsten from the last webinar, who gave you an introduction about the SAP Cloud services. Today is my first webinar, as I said. Steffen Schatto is my name. I'm German, working for the Swiss, exciting, and I'm the managing director of the SAP IDM Services team, which is a team of 10 people dedicated to deliver high level and individual consulting for SAP Identity Management, which also includes the identity provisioning service. It's also touching the identity access governance and the identity authentication service. Yeah, so while I'm with Exciting since 2013, we are working with all the cloud products of SAP since a couple of years, and there's a lot of change happening. So the topic cloud security madness is not really misleading. It's really a little a madness we have there. So I hope after this series, or after this webinar already, you're going to have a little bit more clarity about that. All right, saying that, now you know who I am, how I look like. So I'm going to turn off the camera for performance reasons, and also you can focus better on the presentation. Yeah, so where are we today? Last week, we heard the first webinar, the overview about the cloud security services. And today with part 2, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the identity provisioning service, which, according to SAP, should automate your identity lifecycle processes, which not exactly is the case, but I'm going to talk about that later. Yeah, so let's jump into the actual presentation. We're going to have a short recap of webinar number 1. You learned in the last webinar that the SAP has now a business technology platform, formerly Cloud Platform, which is separated into 2 different landscapes. So on the one hand, we have the business technology platform Neo environment, which is the SAP proprietary infrastructure with its data centers, and which is SAP legacy. It's still supported, but in the future, there will be the focus will be on the multi-cloud foundation, which can run different environments. For example, the Cloud Foundry, which is already there since a couple of years, and also the Kymer environment, the ABAP environment, and also with the multi-cloud foundation, you can use some hyperscalers with Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, for example, which we will see today in the live demo. On these environments or in these environments, we are going to have a lot of services and different platforms. And this webinar series is focusing on the core security services, such as the SAP Cloud Identity Services, which are combined from SAP Cloud Identity Provisioning, SAP Cloud Identity Authentication, and also SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance. All those will be covered in the webinar series, and all those are running within the SAP Business Technology Platform. Of course, there are a lot of more different systems which are already running in the cloud, SAP proprietary systems or other systems like Google G Suite that can be connected, for example, or SAP Ariba, which is not yet implemented, but if anyone is wondering, it's on the roadmap for the identity provisioning service as a target system. So this is basically just very short recap the last webinar, and we are going to take a look today at the cloud identity provisioning. We already saw on the last slide that we have different tools that we can use when we want to enable our company for cloud provisioning and for cloud security. Today, we're just going to talk about the Cloud Identity Provisioning Service, which, like I already said, according to SAP, is your identity lifecycle management and the management of users, roles, and groups. However, you won't get to a compliant to have a compliant identity and role management only with IPS, because that's not possible. So if you want to have identity lifecycle processes implemented, you need to have some kind of identity management system. In this case, of course, this is an SAP slide. It's the SAP Identity Management 8.0, because if you want to have joiner, leaver processes, changing of organization and unit, a name change process that is executed automatically, and all the changes are provisioned automatically to the target system, then you need some kind of identity management system, because the identity provisioning service is not able to do that. And I'll show you later why. So what can the identity provisioning service do for me? Why is there so much buzz around it, and everyone's speaking about, oh my God, we need the IPS to provision users into the cloud? Well, that's actually exactly what it does, because the Cloud Identity Provisioning Service is provisioning user data or group or other information from A to B. So what you basically have, and this is just one slide, you need to explain the IPS, is you need a source system, which can be cloud or on-premise. You need the IPS, and you need a target system. And the identity provisioning service is reading information that has to be defined and can be filtered from a source system and is writing this information to a target system. Now you would say, okay, how is this possible? Because, for example, if we have an Active Directory as a source system, and we have a target system that is, for example, SAP, we have different type of connectors, different type of field names. So this is why the SAP came up with a read and a write transformation. So what you can do when reading and when writing data, you can do a transformation in JSON format. This is quite simple, but you can use all JSON functions that are available. SAP documented that quite well. You can check out on the official sap.help.com in the SAP help. So there you have everything explained, how to read and to transform data and how to write it into your respective target system. So what IPS does is it has two different jobs. I'll come to that later. And if we trigger the read job, it reads the data from the source system, transforms it as we implemented it, and creates a JSON file and sends it to the target system. Also, again, with the transformation we defined beforehand. Now, you don't have to create all these transformation rules by yourself. When you create a new system within the IPS, SAP comes up with a standard set of transformations. We will see that in the live demonstration. So this enables you to read data from a heterogeneous system landscape and provide it to your target system accordingly. How can that be done? For the most part, it's a SCIM standard, System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, which is an underlying concept that is used generally to provision users or identities between systems. And so for most systems, IPS is also using the SCIM standard. Yeah, and this is basically Identity Provisioning Service explained and what it does. Of course, the implementation process, the configuration is quite more complex a little bit. Surprise, surprise. But I'm going to show you a little bit how that works, and it's not too complicated, to be honest. What we have to take into consideration is also what you learned in the first webinar, that if you want to transport data between on-premise and cloud, then you need the SAP Cloud Connector. So this is like a secure tunnel that is connecting your on-premise systems to your cloud. And this is what we need to between the IPS and the on-premise system, or vice versa. We're going to see that in the live demonstration. So to summarize, the SAP Cloud Identity Services, which includes IPS and IaaS. You're going to learn about IaaS in the next webinar, I think. It's a part of many SaaS solutions. So if you, for example, buy the IaaS, the Identity Authentication Service, the IPS is included in the bundle. This is called the bundle license. You can have an identity lifecycle management and provision of identities for cloud-based SAP applications, and of course also for on-premise applications. This could be implemented better if you're using the SAP Identity Management, because then you're going to have a hybrid identity and access management, where you can use your SCIM standard to provision cloud systems and on-premise systems centrally from one system. Also including workflows, lifecycle processes. IPS can collaborate with Cloud Identity Access Governance. It has the customizable transformations. So you can you can work a little bit, put some very basic rules into that transformation. And also this we're going to see later in the live demonstration. We have policy-based assignments, mapping and filtering capabilities. We have job log and notifications. There is support for different source and target systems. I'm going to show you that later. There are a lot of target and source systems. And of course, we can leverage the existing on-prem and cloud user storage by making it way more simple to provision users from A to B. So if we are going to have the identity provisioning service, we are able to automate the ID lifecycle using many different scenarios. One of them we are going to see today by providing access for the users to your SAS or PAAS applications. User creation can be manual, of course, which actually we don't want to have. Can be automated and job-based with identity provisioning, or if we integrate it into the IDM or the EAG, we can also use workflows, lifecycle processes, compliance, and can also automate the provisioning to the respective systems. So now we more or less know what the IPS is and what it does. So how does this, how can this be distinguished to all these to all the other applications or services we have in the SAP portfolio? So if you just take a look at that slide that you already also know from the first webinar, we see that we have identity authentication, we have identity management, identity provisioning, identity access management, identity federation. So many identities, no wonder it's a madness. Yeah. So how do all these compare to each other, and why do I need identity authentication when I have identity provisioning? I tried to break that down for you a little bit by trying to make it very, very simple on a very high level. So for the identity services, we have two different, let's say, services, the identity provisioning service and the identity authentication service, which are running in the cloud, both. And also for the compliant identity lifecycle, we have an identity management. And what can we do with each of those tools or services? And the gray boxes is what the SAP is telling us what we can do with this service. So with identity provisioning, SAP says we can manage identity lifecycle processes for cloud and on-premise systems. Well, we are going to see if that is true. The identity provisioning service automates identity lifecycle processes. Also, I don't know. We're going to see if this is true. It helps you provision identities and their authorizations to various cloud and on-premise business applications. Yes, 100% true. We're going to see how. So according to SAP Identity Authentication, is authentication and single sign-on for users in the cloud. The Identity Authentication Service provides you with controlled cloud-based access to business process, applications, and data through authentication mechanisms, single sign-on, on-premise integration, and convenient self-service options. Well, okay, sounds solid. Now, let's take a look at identity management. It's a central role-based identity management for user and access data within a heterogeneous system landscape. Identity lifecycle, watch out, we have that here also. With approval workflows, rule-based and role-based provision, password management, audit, monitoring, and provisioning. True. I can tell you, I have implemented many of those systems. This is true. This is true. Here, we're talking about that today, and let's take a look at that. So what, to make it very, very simple, what do those services and tools do? Identity provisioning service provisions users from A to B. That's it. Identity authentication authenticates users. Identity management manages users. Here I'm talking about identity lifecycle. So when you take a look at that, then you might come to the conclusion that, oh, actually I need all three functionalities in my system landscape. So apparently you have somehow to obtain all three of them. Depends on your goal and on your strategy, of course, but this is actually what those services do. As for the difference between identity provisioning, we're going to see today in the live demo. Why manage identity lifecycle processes for cloud and on-premise system is maybe not what it really does. Identity authentication, you're going to learn, I think, you're going to learn about in the next webinar. And identity management, I already invite you to on 27th April. We're going to talk about that and how it connects to the cloud. So let's jump back to identity provisioning service. We wanted to take a look about this at the supported systems. I did not put that on the slide because it's a large list and it won't fit on one slide. So as I said, if you go to help.sap.com, you're going to find a lot of information about identity provisioning service. For example, the different identity, the different systems you can connect to it. Also, you'll find that we are having a bundle option and a standalone option, whereas the standalone option is, as today, not obtainable anymore. Unless you know someone at SAP who knows someone, I don't know. Maybe it's technically still possible, but according to the documentation, you only can obtain the bundle versions. So you see that there are some target and source systems missing for the for some specific systems. For those, they're mostly included in the identity and access governance bundle. If, for example, buy the identity authentication, the identity provisioning service is included, so you can use it. Okay, so take a look at that if you're interested in that. I put the URL in the presentation. You're going to get that afterwards. And so we also have specific scenario. For example, the identity authentication. You're going to hear about that in the next webinar. And also the hybrid identity management, which is basically the SAP identity management, including all the identity lifecycle processes, workflows, audits, and everything connected to all the cloud systems via identity provisioning service. We're going to skip that for now because you can save the dates for that. April 6th, we're going to learn about identity authentication. And April 27, I will be back for the hybrid identity management. So save the dates for that. And of course, for all the other webinars of this series. Now we did a lot of talking, a lot of slides, actually just 16, but still, I'm pretty sure you're curious about how this identity provisioning service really works and how it really looks like. Before we jump into the demonstration, I'm going to show you the example architecture, which I have to admit is not really realistic for a use case you're going to have, but it's perfect to show you the abilities of the IPS, and also it gives me the possibility for a great cliffhanger for the end of this presentation, so that you can't wait to be back on 27th for the next webinar. So what are we going to have in the live demonstration? Our source system in this case is the Azure Active Directory, which is obviously in the cloud. We're going to read the data from there with our identity provisioning service. So the Azure Active Directory will be the source system. And then we're going to write this information into our standard application server ABAP in our on-premise landscape using the SAP Cloud Connector. So this is basically what we're going to do now. And as I said already, we are going to add something to the transformation. I already added that. You have to believe me that it was not there before, but I can show you. And so we're adding the title, and the end of the live demonstration, we want to see a user that was created in the cloud in the Azure Active Directory appearing in the on-premise SAP system with a role assigned. All right, so let's start with that. I just want to make sure that Michael or Alessandro or Carsten, maybe you can just confirm that you can see my screen, that I'm now in the Azure Direct and the, oh my God, in the Azure Active Directory.
We can. Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So this is our Azure Active Directory. You see we have some users sitting here, and let's assume that now a new user is starting at our company. So we're going to add a username for him, create a new user, call him Cloud Madness, give him a nice display name. Yes, add some data here. Password has to be generated. And also we want to assign a group for him. Let's choose the SAP World Tour. This is an Active Directory group that I created. Some of you already might see that this is actually an SAP PFCG name of a role. So yeah, let's see what's going to happen with that. Also, we can use the title. As I said, we want to add the title here. So he's the Cloud Madness user. Department, company, name, manager, we can skip here. And of course, what I'm doing here right now is manual work. You actually don't want to do that, do you? Nobody wants to do that. But for this demonstration, we're going to create this user manually. So the user is created, and now it's in our user store, as we can see here. So now let's jump to the identity provisioning service. This is our identity provisioning service. It's as simple as that. Just 4 tiles. If you did not apply for seeing the proxy systems tab, you only see 3 tabs in standard. And yeah, what we basically have here is source systems that we have defined. We have target systems. We have proxy systems, which is important for hybrid identity management. We're going to learn about that in the 7th webinar. And we have job logs. Yeah, so that's basically it. If we take a look now at our example, we have now created the user in the Azure Active Directory. We didn't take a look at the retransformation yet, but we already have created the source system Active Directory. So let's go back to the IPS. This is our data source. Here you'll find the properties that are used to connect to the Azure Active Directory. You can also see that we're not connecting directly to the directory, but rather to the Microsoft Graph app. Also, for this Graph app, there's a very nice documentation how to use filters like that one. But for now, because I want to show you some errors, I'm going to edit this and I'm going to get rid of that group filter. Save. And we're going to take a look at the transformation. So this is the standard transformation you're getting when you create a source system of the type Microsoft Active Directory, except the job title that I added. So I added this part already, which is reading the job title from the Active Directory, and it's using the target path job title also to store it temporarily in the IPS. When we scroll further down, we see that also groups are being read from the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, and also the memberships. What we also did is we already created our XIE 500 target system, which you can see here. And just to show you that I'm not tricking you here, we see that the Cloud Madness user is not there yet, but we want him to be on the system and to be able to work. So the target system is set up similar to the cloud system. We also have details, we have transformation, and we have properties. In the transformation, you'll find that I also added the job title. See, I'm reading now from the job title as a source path. So I'm getting it from there. And you might be familiar with this one because those are the parameters and the field function I need for the function module on SAP ABAP on-premise side. Yeah. So this is basically the parameter used and the field used to create the value in the SU01 in the SAP system. Okay. Properties are not so many here because if you paid attention, you see that we can, when we create a new system here, we define a destination. And this destination you create beforehand in your business technology platform. We have time later for that and there are questions. I can show you how to do that. And also for each target system, we select one source system. So that means that only the data from this source system is written into this target system. You can also select several source systems, but for now, what we want to achieve is just getting the data from the Azure Active Directory into our on-premise SAP system. So we created our source system and we created our target system and said, okay, take the source system we just created as data source. So now we are going to jobs on the source system and say, okay, I want to read that data from there. I want to get that Cloud Madness user in my SAP system as soon as possible. So please read him and send him to the target system. So now the job is running. We can take a look at the job log and we see, okay, it's finished with error. This is what just was executed. So what happened there in the job log? What do we see here? We see that only one group was read, which is strange because there are a lot of groups in the Active Directory. We read 33 users, and when writing into the target system, everything failed. So why is that? The first error is quite simple. We created our user, our Cloud Madness user, but we forgot to add a family name. What do we need when we create a user in the SAP system? Family name and password. So this is quite clear why it failed. While for the group error, it's a little bit more harder to find out, although we see that the connector does not support creating entity of type group, which is true. It cannot create groups which in the SAP system match to PFCG roles. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that the group we're having in the Active Directory system, the one where is our Cloud Madness user? The one we assigned to our Cloud Madness user, we have to make sure that this exists in the SAP system. It's true for that one, but it's not true for that one, for example. And as you can see, it has a space, and we cannot create PFCG roles with spaces. So now we have a problem, because we cannot load and write this group, but it will be read and loaded from the Active Directory system. But we can use this one because this exists in the SAP system. So now let's fix those two errors. The first one I said is quite simple. We're going to check the profile, edit the user, and give him a last name. That's what I forgot on purpose when creating it. So this should fix the first error. And the second error is that we have to focus on loading groups, only the ones that exist in our target system. So now we're going to the source system, go to properties, edit, add a new property, and this property will be, which I already mentioned, it is very well documented, is a group filter. And we only, in this case, want to load groups with a display name equal to set SAP World Tour. Okay, so let's save, go to jobs, run now, and let's take a look at the log. So it's running, success. So we eliminated the two errors we had. So we can see we read one group, which is that set SAP World Tour group, 33 users, and updated was one group. You have to consider that in the SAP system, group translates to PFCG role, and we have one user created, which is hopefully our Cloud Madness user, and it's him. So we see that from our Cloud Connect user. Today at 4:45, it's time here in Switzerland right now, we created this user with our function. We included that into the transformation, if you remember. Yeah, you can take a look here at the field name, which is field name function. Parameter is address. This is exactly what we defined on the transformation in the target system, right here. So you can add and remove transformations here. You can also use JSON functions here and add conditions, stuff like that, as you see here. So if you want to work with that, you have to get in touch with JSON functionality a little bit. So now we have this user created with also the initial password. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not switch to English here. But I think anyone knows the SU01 application. And we also want to take a look at the roles that are assigned, and we see that our PFCG role is automatically assigned in the on-premise target system. Exactly groups, exactly like in the Microsoft Azure. So why is in the SAP system no exciting GmbH role? First of all, we cannot even read it unless we add to the transformation somehow that spaces are removed. But even from the job log error you see here, we know, or from the job log error, we know that the connector, the IPS, cannot create PFCG roles in your on-premise target system. This might differ with different system types. So any system type is specific. So for example, if we want to create a new system, we see that we have a bunch of target systems we can choose from, because this IPS we are using here right now in the demo is a standalone. So we are going to have all the systems. Lucky us, we bought it before, I think, 20th of October. So we still have the standalone version and can add a lot of systems here as target system. Or similar with the source systems, we can also add them as a source system. So what did we just witness? Exactly what we plan to have. We created a user in the source system, read it with IPS, wrote it to the XIE 500 via the SAP Cloud Connector. So there are now two steps involved that you do not want to execute manually. First one is the read job, which can be scheduled. This one is reading all the changed data and only is writing the changed data into the target system. This job does a resync. It reads all data and overwrites all data in the target system. So this cannot be scheduled. It takes a little bit longer and it will completely clean up your target system if there are no errors. So if you want to have that on a regular basis, you can schedule this job, and then you also will get confirmation emails from your IPS that a job was triggered. you can enable and disable those down here with this button. Second thing you don't want to do manually is creating users in your Active Directory. You don't want to go and create each and every user, adding an email address, user principal name, job title, stuff like that. You want to have that automated. And this is what I'm going to show you in webinar number 7. Oh my God, drifting to German. Webinar number 7 on 27th of April, how you can automate your whole identity lifecycle, create users automatically, create SAM account names, email addresses, and automatically create them in your Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which then can be the data source for other systems, for example. Yeah. So this is the cliffhanger I promised you to provide at the end. We're going to see how that works in about a month. So I would be more than happy to see you there again. As for the identity provisioning service, we are now at the end of the presentation. So yeah, I hope you can see clearly now about all the different identity services, a little bit more about identity provisioning service. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to provide them now, or also you're going to get my contact information at the end. You can contact me or Alessandro or Michael or Carsten directly. If you have any questions, need help with anything, yeah. So if there are no questions,
there are
or
questions.
maybe we have questions.
Yeah. Yes.
All right.
I'm just going to read out some of them. So the first question was from the beginning, while it was like half an hour in. It was, why do you need the SAP Cloud Connector? I'm not entirely sure in what context that was or what slide you showed at the time,
Yeah.
but it was at 11:33 a.m.
Yeah.
That helps.
You need it because you cannot connect directly from IPS to your on-premise systems. For that, you need the cloud connector that gives you the opportunity to open a port, and host to the cloud. So you cannot write directly into the on-premise system. You have to go via the SAP Cloud Connector. And you have to configure your system there. You can put a virtual host there, and it will be mapped to the actual host of the gateway of your SAP ABAP system. Also, you can use it for connecting local Active Directories, for example. But you cannot go directly from cloud to on-premise via IPS or vice versa. For that, if you want to do that, you would need, for example, to configure a proxy system. And this can, for example, IDM, Sap Identity Management, is running on-premise, but it can connect directly to the IPS. But for that, you need a proxy system. And we're going to see that in the webinar number 7. But if you want to have a target system here that is running on-premise and you want to provide the data for that, then you need the SAP Cloud Connector. For other cloud systems, from cloud to cloud, you don't need that. From cloud to premise, or from on-premise to cloud, you need the Cloud Connector.
Okay. Second question, which might be somewhat related, is, are there any RFCs required?
What exactly do you mean with RFC?
I assume it means RFC interfaces.
Remote function calls.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Well, you're using the RFCs when configuring the SAP Cloud Connector. So maybe I just show you. So this is our SAP Cloud Connector, and when you go to Cloud to on-premise, let's switch to the account. Then you see that you have to define the protocol that is used, and from the SAP Cloud Connector, you're going to connect to the different function module calls by using RFC calls. So this is the not all, but the configuration that is reused here when writing to the XIE 500 system. So yes, there are RFC calls involved.
Okay. And then again, somewhat related, I think, is the Cloud Connector also required, or does it support going from ABAP to the cloud instead of cloud to ABAP or cloud to on-prem?
Yes, it does. As you can see here, on-premise to cloud.
All right.
We did not do that here, right, in this demonstration, but it's supported.
Okay. And then a question related to Azure AD. Do you need to create all the SAP roles in Azure? Or any SAP roles in Azure?
Well, it depends. As I said, this go to that. This is not really a use case a lot of companies are going to have, because if you're having a cloud system, you might want to fill the Azure Active Directory with data so that the Azure Active Directory is used as a source for other systems, but not for your SAP system. So actually, what you would have is, let me get the laser pointer. Best practice is that you have somewhere an identity management system running that is running on-premise and is provisioning on-premise systems directly. So this XIE 500 would be provisioned by my on-premise identity management system, and the on-premise identity management system would deliver the Azure Active Directory. So in this case, the Azure Active Directory would be the target system. So what you do here might be a use case for some, but it's not the SAP best practice.
Okay. And then maybe one more question, we have time, and that is, how does IPS work in combination with IAG?
Yeah, it's you're going to see that probably in webinar number 4 and 5, but okay. it's actually included in the IAG, and as a service. So it's a bundle, okay. And I don't know if the UI is going to be the same for creating target systems and source systems, but I think so. And as I already showed you here, it is coming as bundled version.
Okay.
So it's going to behave. I think the technology behind is exactly the same.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Now we're at the top of the hour, so I think we will wrap it up for today. Thanks for everyone for attending, for all of your questions, and we'll try to answer anything offline that will not be covered in the next couple of webinars. And again, look out for an email with the link to the recording and the slide deck. Thanks again for joining, and we hope we see you next Tuesday. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for joining.